Hi, this is Jim Benson from Modus Cooperandi and Personal Kanban, welcoming you to the second episode of Collaberwocky. Our guests today are Jabe Bloom and Corey Ladas. Jabe is the CTO of the Library Corporation, and Corey is the author of Scrumban and a pioneer in lean software development. And our conversation today is the language of management.
Right. And that's one of mine. The short introduction for the language of management is that as people move up through rungs of the corporate ladder, their job descriptions change, which means that their focus on the world changes. And as that changes, the language that they use to describe value or to describe pleasure changes. And the discrepancies of those languages between the different rungs of management are kind of what causes those divides from one group to the next, and why you end up with rifts saying, managers don't understand us, and I don't understand what my employees are doing, and they're all insane. So how do you avoid that, Jabe?
How do you avoid that? I don't know. I think certainly it's one of the things that I see a lot in Agile world, which is a real negative attitude towards management, a real misunderstanding of management, a real devaluing of management, which I think is very interesting. One of the things that I would say to most people who would tell me that all managers are jerks is when you guys figure out Brooks' Law so that you can all communicate to each other freely and there needs to be nobody going in between the teams at all, then we can go to completely flat organizations where there doesn't have to be any management. But until then, somebody has to be in the middle of the teams. I don't know that the extreme hierarchy and power problems that we have in management right now are the best way to handle those issues. But there's a real backlash against management, and a lot of the for me, a lot of the issues around things like, if you go back to the all the way back to the new development game paper. It's clear that the people who they were talking about in those papers, people who were designing the cars, those were not factory workers. Those were what we would all call middle managers nowadays. That is the original Scrum team, was a bunch of middle managers, not a bunch of line workers or production people. I think that we do need to work on how to communicate the value of management more clearly and make it, make the average team understand what it is that they're getting from management. Things like, as a team, do you really want to be responsible for sales and marketing? I'm sure that there are teams out there that could do that, but if you take your average, let's say 8 people is the right size team, how many of them can be doing sales and marketing and billing and on and on?
Right, the same people that are likely to devalue management as a group are also people who are likely to devalue, sales and marketing. So
absolutely. On the other extreme of this, I would say that there's a bunch of people talking now about the average lifetime of a corporation in the United States is decreasing radically, and I'm not sure I care about that. I'm not sure that part of the answer shouldn't be that we should have smaller companies that live for less time, and that actually might be a social good, right? That in fact, big companies are a lot like cancer. They get out of control. They no longer respond to their environment. They're really hard to kill, and they're really, really damaging to the host, right?
Yeah. You could almost say they were monsters.
Yes. we have a topic on that, I think. Anyway, but the point being that I'm not sure that one of the ways that we shouldn't be trying to figure out how to make the language of management work better is in smaller organizations, and that maybe that's a better way of doing it. I don't know.
I mean,
go ahead.
When we were sort of making the big push on introducing a lot of lean ideas into the software development vocabulary, a lot of what we were attempting was kind of the reverse of that, right? That we were getting sort of the, production workers using a more business-friendly vocabulary, not only so that they would understand how they relate to the business better, but also so that they could confront their managers with, express their own understanding and confront bullshit that they saw in the world, right? And that if we could get more people talking in the same language and agreeing on the meanings of words and things like that, that we would sort of break down some of those artificial barriers and kind of start to overcome a little bit of that us versus them mentality that you see in documents like, the Agile Manifesto.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one of the things that, so when, to oversimplify, worker is sitting and working, manager comes to worker and says, why aren't you done yet? And worker says, this is a lot of work. And manager says, why aren't you done yet? They're both talking about the same value being produced at the end, but one is talking about time and one is talking about effort.
Yep.
And
yeah, I mean,
and they're not coordinated.
No.
You might be able to translate them, but they're not. It's a difficult language to speak at the same time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, to riff on that, one of the things that we worked on here for a while, and that we still work on a lot, is as managers, we were expressing things. They weren't deadlines; they were value amounts. So we would say, "This needs to be done in 2 days." People would be like, "That can't be done in 2 days," and we say, "No, it has to be done in 2 days." And we say, "You can't possibly get this done in 2 days." We're like, "No, you don't understand. It has to be. I don't have any more money than that. 2 days is the amount of money I have for this." And they're like, "Well, it can't be done." And we're like, "Do as much of it as you can in 2 days," right? And it was a very frustrating conversation because we were talking about the same thing, this concept of time from two completely different perspectives. And we had to start saying to people, I want you to do as much as you can, not deep but wide, for 2 days to figure out this problem. And I want you to bring me back the results from that 2 days, and we will evaluate at that time whether we should spend more money on doing it or not. That's what I'm saying. Not that the deadline's then. I don't expect you to be done. I expect you to be done enough that we can actually evaluate where we're going again. That type of language change and that type of frustration is endemic. And and this is from a group of people who've worked together for a very long time to overcome those types of issues. Mm-hmm. And have spent a lot of effort trying to get around it. It's really interesting to me. So.
Well, you can just imagine from their side, authority figure comes to them and says, I have this thing and I need it in 2 days. And they're like, holy crap, I can't finish this in 2 days. And then after that, the entire conversation is their self-preservation. It has nothing to do about the thing anymore. It's just, how can I get out of this conversation without Jabe anticipating that I'm actually going to finish this work within 2 days? And you could tell them exactly what you told them, which is, I don't really need the thing in 2 days. I need progress so that I can judge how many more than 2 days this might be. And of course, if you ask them for that, they wouldn't help all that much, because then they'd be like, what if I have 2 hyper-productive days and then I run into a wall on the 3rd day?
Right.
So the problem with, as I see it in the conversation that you were having at that point, was there was no pre-existing language to speak, and that was the conversation you started with, not my name, me Jabe, you John, that kind of thing. It was a high stakes conversation to bridge that topic initially, and so I think that now if you had those conversations, it would be very different because you've had a lot of conversations since then.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting with a lot of the cognitive psychology issues involved as well are kind of interesting. This idea that we're not very good at comparing different things.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're actually talking about time in different ways with different value systems, it's actually hard to measure them against each other as well. So that makes it, I think, even more difficult to get around those conversations because the value systems are so radically different that it's like trying to say, is this as loud as red is red? It doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people initially. And frankly, I don't have a very good vocabulary change to point at based on those conversations. I couldn't tell you how to say it to somebody who hasn't had the conversations I've had, right? So in this case, really the practice is the teacher. Like literally, the only way that we could get to do it was by doing it together, and that's interesting, I think.
Yeah, Jim knows. I go on and on about dialectics, and that's pretty much exactly why. Right? That every context is unique. Every situation depends entirely on the people involved and the problems, and the environment involved. And really, the only path through any difficult, complex problem is unique and progressively disclosed as you go along. So, there's logic to it, right? The outcomes, the things that we learn are logical, but there's no way to acquire that logic other than by participating in the situation as it exists.
I certainly think, that's absolutely true for all knowledge work is like that to me. Like, I think that it's possible that if you're making hot dogs, you can teach people how to make perfectly adequate hot dogs by instructing them exactly how to make a hot dog.
Right.
But you're not producing any form of incremental value. I'm not even sure the right term that I want to use for that. But you're not creating new things each time. So I think that literally by its nature, knowledge work requires exploring spaces that haven't been explored before, at least by the team. If you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, well, that's what copy paste is for. You don't need to do the same things over and over again.
The hot dog analogy works. So if I were to show you how to operate the machine that ran meat through the machine and into the casing, that's making a hot dog, but it's not making you a butcher.
Yes.
And so one of the things I've been talking about recently is that with knowledge work, we run into this problem because other people's views, and this is another one of those wonderful cognitive biases, our view of our life is that it's infinitely more complicated than others. Our view of other people's lives is that it's infinitely more simplistic than ours.
Yes.
So when we look at another profession, we are going to think of how easy it is to do that profession, and we are not, unless we have overwhelming evidence to the contrary, we're going to stick with that for a very long time. So one of the issues that we run into with knowledge work is that it doesn't live in any one quadrant of the Cynefin framework. It lives in all 4 of them at the same time.
Yep.
So when we come to, we go to a designer and we say, make me a new logo, all we think is, man, it's just drawing a circle with like a letter in the middle of it. What's so hard about that? What we don't recognize is, yes, picking up the pencil and moving it around, that's the simple part. but there's complicated, complex, and chaotic elements of it as well. So you can totally best practice where you put your pencils, but you can't do the spark that creates suddenly awesome logo.
It's like computer programming is not really reducible to typing.
Yes.
Right. I think there's I have two different ideas about it. One is that I think that ordered and unordered, or simple and complex, are actually like Bohr's concept of the complementary. They're like wave and particle. It really depends on your viewpoint, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the perspective that you're taking. It's your perspective, how you view it, and what you're trying to get out of it, frankly, that defines whether the thing's a particle or a wave right now. And I think that's true about complexity and simplicity. I think depending on your point of view and what you're trying to achieve, they appear to have different qualities, right? So like you're saying, for a manager, the answer is, I don't care how you become inspired or whatever it is you have to do to make the freaking logo. I need it by Friday because we got to publish the ad. It's simple. Period. That is how I'm evaluating it, right? And from the other perspective, from the designer's perspective, they're looking at you and saying, wait a second, you're putting pressure on me, and I can show you all sorts of studies that tell me that pressuring me will make me less creative, which will only make it more. It's like a snowball, and the world's going to be, So I think it really depends on your perspective, and I think it's something that people have a hard time with. The other thing I'll say about you can't reduce software engineering to typing, but and I'll get in trouble for this, I'm sure of it. But I think that most of the XP practices are complicated, if not simple. Most of them, I think, are actually simple. I think the answer is, if you are programming, you should be using most of the XP practices, period. They are the right practices for achieving what you need. The hard thing about software engineering, the complex thing about software engineering, is the social system that decides what the hell you're programming, right? Like agreeing on what to program, that's the hard part, right?
Yeah, I totally agree, right? I mean, the way I put it is that most of the value is in the requirements, not in the design.
Once you know what you're doing, you can give it to any reasonable, competent engineer, and say to them things like, it needs to be unit tested and well architected. Those things all have meaning that are all on the ordered side of the concept graph. The complex stuff is, what the hell are we building and why?
Mm-hmm. Well, and then the chaotic part of it is, what part of this system is going to blow up for no reason that we can figure out, and we'll figure. Right. So I'm attempting to jump in and save you because I think you're absolutely right, and that's the manager view of the stereotypical manager view of software developers, is that I should be able to give you features and you should be able to come out with product, but then they go one, which is true, but then they go one more step, which is by this date and for this much money.
Yep.
And that's the part that is a lot harder to do. When you know what you want to build, you can generally build it, but you're going to run into some issues along the way that freak you out. So that's where the language has to come back from the other side that say, I hear you, I know what you want. We're going to have a dialogue as we move forward to refine the features, but just know this, something crazy is going to happen before we're done. And if we ignore that, then everybody's going to be upset by the completion of it. And it really bothers me when Scrum teams say that they didn't make their sprint because they wanted to do 12 things and they were only able to get 11 done. It's like, no, you made your sprint perfectly. You put too much stuff in it, and the next one took 2 more days. And guess what? That's just how much time it took. You'd bust your sprint if you finished everything on time with a lot of technical debt.
Yep.
Getting things done on time is much more detrimental than getting things done when they're actually complete.
Yeah, and without some training, people are just really uncomfortable with reasoning about uncertainty. There's just no way to get around that in this business. So we need better language for talking about uncertainty.
Okay. So this has been a pretty long one. So do we have A quick way that we can deal with this uncertainty, and then we'll close up the topic.
No, I have like 6 blog posts that I could unravel right here. But this is, like I have like 6 things written up for this topic already.
Some of that was what we were trying to accomplish by introducing a lot of language about flow and value and those kinds of things. And we're also, some of us were also trying to accomplish a similar thing by introducing language about optionality. I don't know, that didn't quite catch on as much. I'm still holding out hope for that one.
Yeah, the options, the real options stuff and the options theory stuff has been harder to get people to understand because it sounds so logical that they stop thinking about it. It's like, yeah, I know, I have a choice and then I have another choice and I do the one that's right. Okay, so let's move on to the third topic here.
And that's all for episode 2. Tune in a few days for episode 3, where Corey and Jabe and I discuss speaking from power in an uncertain world. See you then.